Okay, today, welcome everyone to The Power of Our Story. My name is Sarah Carell, the founder of The Power of Our Story. Today we have Jen Satterly. I am so excited to have her as she is a powerful voice of really what is needed today. She is the co-founder and co-CEO of All Secure Foundation. ASF serves special operations and combat warriors and their families heal from the invisible wounds of war. She's also the founder of Virago, which serves and empowers spouses of combat warriors dealing with the struggles on the home front. She is the author of Arsenal of Hope, Tactics for Taking on PTSD Together. Guys, it is a fantastic book. It's so real. And these are people that have worked through so much. They are willing to share their stories vulnerably so that others can have the tools to heal together as a united front. I cannot say more about this book. Jen is also an award-winning photographer and filmmaker who spent 3 years embedded with an elite special operations training company as director of film and photography. She became a certified health coach in the course of her research into post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. She's married to Tom Satterly, who retired after 25 years as a highly decorated Command Sgt Major of Delta Force, the most elite and secretive U.S. military special operations unit. And he is the author of All Secure, a special operations soldier's fight to survive on the battlefield and the home front. And I'm so grateful to have you, Jen, because as I have been doing The Power of Our Story and hearing so many of our protectors' stories, it became clear that when people really hit rock bottom, it's when their relationships went sideways. And that is something that I've been very passionate about, is like, how do we get into the gap to prevent suicides? And I feel like your voice is really hitting that core. And we don't talk about the home front a lot. We hear people's stories on trauma, but we don't talk about the reality of where the marriages are at. And so I just want to thank you so much for having the courage. You and Tom, you both had to be willing. You both had to have the courage to hit this issue. So I'm very grateful, and thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who is here today as well. I really enjoyed getting to know you, Sarah, and having a few conversations on the side. They've been great. You know, I love that this can be a conversation as well. So I invite anyone, if I say something, if you've got a question or you want information, you want me to back up or repeat something. I know Sarah is able to look at a hand raise or something like that. I'd love to keep it informal and just, if you've got a question or a comment, go ahead and let me know. But really, you know, there's so many different avenues that you could take with a trauma story. Usually there's not just one direction to go. And so when I was thinking about today and what I would like to talk about, one of the questions that we get primarily from Tom is, did your PTS show up? And a little side note, my book is called Tactics for Taking PTSD Together. That is something that the publisher kind of demanded, that the D had to be on the end. Tom and I in our organization calls it post-traumatic stress injury. However, that is not a coined or official term, so the publisher scratched that. So just a little side note, we do call it PTS or PTSI or PTSG, post-traumatic growth. So people will ask, Tom, did you get your PTS during transition or your timeout? No, that came on October 3rd, 1993, during the Battle of Mogadishu. So he was involved in what's popularly known as Black Hawk Down. He was 25 years old. He was told he probably wouldn't make it back out to make his peace. And so that's where his trauma began. And truly how it manifested for him throughout his career was perfection-driven aggression. He didn't want that to repeat ever. So he became hypervigilant. He trained constantly. I'm his fourth wife because wife 1, 2, and 3 said me or a Delta Force, and we saw where that ended up. And, really for him, his trauma manifested in a way that looked very common to the men right and left of him. He was essentially in the soup. And it's very difficult to kind of see through that fog when you're in it. So I met Tom when I was about 35 years old. I was spending my entire career in advertising, marketing, and design. I was working with St. Louis Cardinals, Miller Brewing Company, fashion organizations. So I had no experience in military or special operations when I was asked to come and start filming realistic military training exercises. In fact, like the first 3 times they asked, I said no. They said, hey, listen, you shoot sports photography. This is high action stuff. You could totally do this. And I said, I don't know this culture. I don't know this world. They're like, you've spent your career getting to know different clients and brands. So when I stepped in, I think because I was outside of the soup, I was able to look without that lens of fog. And with those 3 years, I questioned myself often, especially when Tom was shoving me on the back of a Chinook or strapping me into a Black Hawk. And I'm terrified of flying, by the way. So his safety briefing is, if you go down, you're dead anyways, just don't worry about it. So there was a lot of moments where I'm like, this is awesome. How am I here again? And I'm 40 and, maybe not eating, but every 3 days, getting a couple hours of sleep a night. So when I started asking myself that question, why am I here? I soon realized it wasn't to help train these men to go overseas and fight. It was to help them on the fight on the home front. Because truly what I was seeing, it didn't matter what group I was with. It didn't matter what unit I was with. I was seeing the exact same issues with 25-year-old guys, 40-year-old guys, with a Navy SEAL, with a Green Beret. It didn't matter. And so what I started to see was this collective narrative of, hey, I've got this. I love combat. I'll go overseas. I get this work environment. I'm comfortable actually in it. In fact, when I'm home for 2 or 3 weeks, I'm ready to go back because there's some sort of comfort or safety for me because I know what to do. I've got the handbook. I've got leaders. I could figure this out. But when I come home, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to be a father I need to be. I don't know how to be the husband I need to be. By the way, I'm gone all the time. On average, a special operator's gone 250 days a year. So that disconnection becomes part of the problem. So back to Tom and him not being diagnosed. He left the Army. They said, you do not have PTS, gave him a 20% disability stamp, and he was on his way. So when I met Tom and started working alongside of him and starting to see some of these patterns, not only with the man I was dating, but pretty much everyone who was surrounding me, this reckless behavior, this kind of mindset that was truly causing the suicide epidemic, people weren't looking at the family as much. But what I started to notice is when I started asking, I'd have my little notebook and I'd go around, and during downtime, I'd start to talk to the guys and I'd say, what's the greatest issue you are faced with? I didn't put any ideas into their head. I just asked, what is the greatest area? And of course, I was expecting something much different, but 9 out of 10 told me I need help at home. I need help for my spouse. I need help for my kid. I don't know what to do. I don't know why I'm angry all the time. I don't know why I explode when there's a cup in the sink or when somebody leaves a sock on the floor. I can't control this anger. I don't know what to do with this aggression. And that was our primary ask was, what do I do with this? And how do I cope with this as a warrior? And then even when I get to the other side of it, how am I going to live my best life? And it was, I think what Tanya had said as well, I didn't have a guidebook either. And I just had to use something called Google. And I started searching and I started looking for answers. This was back in 2013. And I would even just say between then and now, there have been so many more doors open to healing, so many more conversations about, hey, this is a biological issue. And in fact, Sarah, I need to update my bio because I have in there the invisible wounds of war, which is something that we were saying up until about a year ago when we truly have changed that statement as well. It's not invisible. It's a visible wound. You can see it. In fact, Tom just had his brain scanned this summer. There was something in there. Sorry, honey. Usually has a little funny quip back with that. But when he had his brain scan, the doctor goes, look, this is your brain. This is the injury. And he was able to point out exactly everything that Tom was facing. He's like, do you get angry? Not just angry, but rage. Yep. Okay, that's this part of the brain. Do you have trouble with brain fog or decision making? Yep. Okay, that's this part of the brain. Do you have trouble sleeping? Yep. Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have perfection driven aggression? Yep. Do you have OCD tendencies? Yep. Do you have addiction issues? Yep. All of these things, he was able to map out Tom's brain. And just by looking at this picture, he could tell exactly what the injury was. And, you know, the part that was so beautiful was he said, let me show you this. This is an NFL player. He has TBI, traumatic brain injury. He served in his role of aggressor and athlete for almost 20 years. So his damage was extensive. In fact, his brain kind of looked a lot like Tom's. And the great part about it was this. He said this man ended up in a bridge, under a bridge. He was homeless, substance abuse issues, divorced, all of these things. His life was totally wrecked. Another NFL player found him under the bridge, brought him to this doctor in California and said, can you help my friend? And he said, yes, this is an injury and it can be healed. And then he showed Tom a picture of his brain now, completely healed. Is his life all better? Probably not. Does he still have some things to deal with? Probably. But now he's a pharmaceutical sales rep. He's remarried. He lives a happy and successful life because the injury was treated. Does it just come from war or combat? Nope. In fact, I was raised in an abusive household. My mom was also raised in an abusive household, and her mom and dad were also raised in abusive households. So this trauma could be generational. In fact, we know it is. It is something that can be passed to spouse or to child when it is untreated. However, through treatment and addressing this injury, you can get to the other side of it. It doesn't need to be a generational curse, as they called it. At a very young age, I knew I wanted my life to be different. I knew I wanted the experience for my children to be different. And it is something I've consciously worked on my entire life. And again, I didn't have a rule book. I just started looking at, okay, I don't feel so great about these aspects of my life. How do I get to the other side of feeling better? And there was a Marine, we just did a speaking engagement. He has come up with a beautiful system for checking in, especially in a very macho alpha A world, where when you ask one of your brothers, how are you doing? You get the response, good, fine, or I'm not doing so great, but I really don't want to get into the story about what happened with my wife or my kids last night. Maybe there's some embarrassment or some shame, or maybe they just don't want to get into it. So where our stories are very powerful, sometimes they're the roadblock for healing. So this Marine came up with a system. Green, it's like a stoplight, green, yellow, orange, red. And so he can ask his brothers or sisters when he calls, hey, where are you at? I'm in orange. And he can just ask the simple question, how do we get you back to green? Or how do we get you to yellow to get you to green? And it has been a remarkably powerful thing. In fact, we have taken it ourselves and said, where are you at? That meter is really important. So through healing my own trauma, again, I wasn't given the diagnosis of complex PTS, even though that's what it was. I wasn't even diagnosed with secondary PTS until about 3 years ago. Tom and I were sitting in a therapist and she said, well, you know, you have secondary from this current relationship, right? I was like, what's secondary PTS? I had never heard of it. Although I had experienced it, I didn't understand that label or what it meant, because for me, what I was experiencing was very different than what I saw Tom experiencing with his trauma. So where he would have rage or outburst, maybe aggressive tendencies, or we both had reckless behavior. You know, Tom and I are always the people that are like, we don't wag our finger, because if anyone's done it, we've probably done it 10 times over. So our trauma, how it came about, was very different. His related to combat, mine related to childhood abuse and sexual trauma. But the way we felt was very similar. So we joked, my trauma was attracted to your trauma, but there's kind of a truth in that. There's sort of a comfort in that, understanding somebody who you don't feel normal, you don't feel sane, you feel a little crazy a lot of the times. And that could be very, very isolating. And so what I was noticing when I was working alongside Tom was this isolation was really killing people as well. This sense of I can't ask for help because it means I'm weak. I don't understand that it's an injury. I think it is still a disorder because that's how it's been labeled. The veteran under the bridge is still the story, and I don't want any part of that. So I can't have that. I don't want to own that. But until we can kind of own our story and own what it is, whatever label you want to put on it, you don't know how to heal from it. So this diagnosis for Tom, where it's nope, you don't have that. It's not that it gave him permission for bad behavior. It just didn't create an understanding of how to heal from it. I didn't understand how to heal from secondary because for me and for most spouses, it shows up like eggshell syndrome, which is due to the unpredictable behavior of your spouse. So if I'm cleaning the house all day and I think I've got everything under control, the kids are good, the dogs are good, the house is good, there's nothing for him to get upset about today. And then he walks in and it's an explosion over something else. Over time, I'm going to start monitoring my behavior, my words, my actions in order to fit somebody else. And that will cause anxiety, depression, anger. We know a lot of spouses who have substance abuse issues and unfortunately suicide. We do know that spouses are committing suicide at least twice than the civilian population, and children in a combat home 17 times higher than the civilian population. So the war does come home. It is a generational impact. But the good thing about it is this can be broken. And it's not that difficult. I think that is one of the main messages that we like to tell people is it doesn't have to be the mountain. And like they tell you, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's the same thing with trauma. It's one step at a time. And for most, it's not here's a shot or here's a pill or here's a therapist. It's usually multiple things. And Tom and I have gone through maybe a dozen different healing modalities. Each of them have brought something to us. Each of them have brought a measure of healing. Each of them have been that one bite of the elephant. And where Tom was 8 years ago when he was suicidal, sitting in a car with a gun in his lap, wanting to end it, to where he is now is a remarkable difference. It's day and night. In fact, we just went back to Delta Force, and a lot of the guys are like, what did you do to him? Like, what's happened to him? And, you know, the initial questions were like, why? What's going on? Oh, usually he was grumpy or standoffish or, you know, he was this, or that. And Tom's like, wait, I'm getting shit now for being happy. I'm getting trouble for that. But yeah, he is happy. He is healed. And is it a journey? Absolutely. Will we probably be on it forever? Probably to some degree. What Tom has seen, done, and been through is not something that there's a whiteboard that we can just erase those experiences. In fact, I don't know that we want to erase those experiences. Does he want to sit around and think about Somalia, the friends he lost, the situation that day, that night? No. Has he told that story enough where he can get through it without crying or without being emotional or having a response? Yes. There are other incidences and other combat missions he's been on that weigh heavy on his heart and things that he still has to deal with and come to terms with. And that's not an overnight thing. There is no magic pill for erasing experiences that are traumatic. However, with an injury, we understand we can heal those. And one of the things about PTS is the sooner you address it, the sooner you heal from it. We know that this is a biological injury. So the longer you wait to get help is as long as you'll suffer from it. So we just met a guy maybe 2 years ago now, served in the Battle of Bulge. 98 years old, came up to us after a speaking engagement. Actually his grandchildren did. And he said, can you come to Tom? Can you come over and meet my grandpa? He fought in the Battle of Bulge. We're like, oh my gosh, we love World War II veterans. Absolutely. And Tom and him sat real close and they kind of talked. And he started to get his voice started to get a little shaky. And he said, you know, there hasn't been a single day in all of these years that I haven't thought about that time. There isn't a day I haven't thought about the men that I've lost. And I'm really embarrassed and ashamed of some of the behavior, the way I've treated my family over these years. I didn't know and I didn't understand until you guys spoke today. And then he held Tom's hand as he cried and said, I'm going to go get help tomorrow. As he said that, a Vietnam veteran heard them talking and saw them connecting. He came over and he said, I'm sorry, can I sit down with you guys for a minute? Of course, yeah, sit down with us. And he said, I heard what you said. All these years, I thought it was just me. I thought I was broken. I thought there was something wrong with me because the other men I served with in Vietnam, yeah, I get some of them ended up pretty screwed up. I get that. But, you know, the guys I served with, they're fine. They didn't have any issues. I think it's just me. And when Tom leaned forward and said, then the other people are sociopaths because war is going to affect every single person. And it doesn't make you weak. It makes you a human being. And then he started to cry and said, you know what? I'm going to go get help tomorrow. Our stories are so powerful because of that connection of we're not alone in this. This is not a matter of willpower to get over it. There's nothing you could do. In fact, rubbing dirt on it is only going to give you an infection. You can heal from it. Just like when you break an arm, you go see a doctor, they reset the injury and you heal from it over time. Same thing here. Same thing with trauma. And, you know, what I'd love to say before I open it up to some questions too is Tom and I have an open book. So if there's a question about anything that we've gone through, please don't hesitate to ask. We have been through hell on earth healing from this trauma. It has not been easy. It has not been a picnic. In fact, there were times early on in the beginning of our relationship where I was questioning my own sanity for being involved with the trauma, the abuse, the anger, the violence, and until I realized that part of what Tom was trained, his muscle memory. So not only the biological injury where somebody can point and look and say, hey, this is all the stuff that's going on, but he also had moral injury. He also had survivor's guilt. And he also had a chock full of things that he hadn't processed or dealt with. I was coming into our relationship with previous trauma. I was coming in with unhealed issues and things that I didn't and I wasn't aware of as well. So it's not all about pointing my finger at Tom. And I think for a while it was easy to, right? It's easy to say, well, his situation is way worse. His trauma is way worse. So if there's an issue, if there's a fight, if there's something wrong, it's his fault. That was obviously not the best path to take, as well as the initial path I started to take, which was not walking Tom by his side to the drinking well. I was shoving him and pushing him. Like they say, you can lead a horse to water. I was doing everything I could. And the only thing that was doing for Tom was creating a narrative. You're not good enough where you are right now. You're unworthy. And it was the opposite message I was trying to convey, which is, I love you so much. I want you healed. I want you happy. I want you healthy. That's what I wanted for him more than anything in the world. However, shoving, pushing, pulling was creating a much different response. And until Tom said one day, I don't feel like I'll ever heal quick enough for you. I'm afraid you'll leave because I'm trying. I just can't get there fast enough. That I sat there in tears saying, oh my God, that's not the intention. If you never heal any further than you are right now, we'll make it. We're good. We will get through this. But the pushing and pulling, it almost killed us both. It really almost buried us both. And I realized we could be the lighthouse for others. We could share our stories. We could talk about all the awful things that we've seen and done and been part of. And hopefully that creates a sense of common. We're all in this together. We can even share tools, resources, but we can't do the work for anyone. We can't make someone, people will call us all the time. Hey, can you call my buddy? Can you call my friend? No, we can't do that. You have to be responsible for your own healing. Everyone has the ability. It's just, what is your response to that ability? How will you heal? What is your first step? I can't answer that for someone else. I tried for the first few years, tried to help people with, here, do this. That doesn't work either. So to anyone who is suffering, who doesn't want to suffer anymore, there are many ways to start this journey, and whatever it is for that particular person, that's the right step. I think judgment gets pulled in a lot in this community and in the talks about trauma, comparison and judgment. Those are biological needs that we have as well. We still have our caveman brains. And there's a reason why we have comparison and judgment. It keeps us safe and secure. However, when we compare our stories, when we compare our trauma and our healing, it might set us back. It might say, well, my combat mission wasn't like his, so I shouldn't feel this way. Or my trauma wasn't like hers, so I shouldn't feel this way. Whenever we compare, whenever we judge, we're stealing that moment of healing. We're stealing maybe somebody else's hope. So I'd always encourage people to just be a really good active listener. It's the number one question we're asked. How can I help? Be a really good listener. And on the other side of the fence, if you wouldn't switch shoes with somebody else, be careful about taking their advice. Because there's a lot of it in this arena as well. You'll hear one person who's a prophet about ayahuasca and another person's going to be a prophet about stellate ganglion. There might be a lot of judgment in between. This journey is your own. It's for you to own. It's for you to explore. I'll tell you, we've gone through 4 therapists. Our last one we loved so much, we hired her at the foundation. But if we would have given up on the first one, we never would have gotten to Stacy. She had no combat experience. She had never worked with military before she worked with us. And so what we do is strip excuses away. We have a lot of guys and gals saying, I won't talk to a therapist unless they've been to combat. Tom has a great response, which is, if you didn't go to school for 8 years to become a therapist, maybe they don't want to talk to you either. So everyone has their own role in this community, in this tribe that we have. Everyone has their own part to play in it. And when you're open to listening to new ideas, new people, that's when healing and growth begins. So I've gone on and on. I'm blaming the coffee right now because it's about my 4th cup. But I'd love to kind of pause. I could see there's a lot of chat, but I can't see what it is. So I just don't know if there's a specific question or something.
Sure. Jen, that was so beautifully shared. I mean, you hit so many powerful points. And I have to say, I saw Black Hawk Down and I'm still stressed. I mean, that
Yes.
I cannot imagine. And to even understand that somebody had to live through that and still have it and then come back to Disneyland, right? Where we are oblivious. There is just so many thoughts. I'll just share them really quickly and then open it up to everybody. You were talking about comparing. We talked about that last night on a group. We've talked about that many times. Many times veterans will not come on and share because they feel like somebody else had a worse time at it and their voice doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. And how a majority of the military has had the same experience. They just need somebody to open up and share their story. I loved how you shared too, that, when we love people, we want to kind of push them. We want them to heal, and how that had the opposite effect, that it made them feel not good enough. And how do we know that until there's a Tom and Jen that share that with us, or even I cannot imagine how that must have felt for Tom to actually see his brain scan and to see that visible wound. Like, what an incredible relief that must have been to see that he truly does have an injury, that he's not going crazy, or he's, whatever thoughts could go on there. So, Jen, I'm telling you from my own experience in the power of her story, your voice is so powerful and so needed right now. And I just thank you and Tom for being so willing to be so vulnerable and share. So thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Did I see Johnny Walker's hand? There you are.
Hey, Tom and Jen, that was really well said. I really liked your story. I could actually, it's different, but I could relate a lot. My wife and I both, my wife is at ground zero. I went in on 9/11, and where you said that trauma attracts trauma. And then I had a real kind of a messed up childhood, much more to a degree than what you would consider hers, but hers was still not ideal, right? Just because her parents didn't get divorced and there wasn't like physical abuse and stuff like that inside of it. Like there's still other types of trauma that she went through it, and and it took us that healing process. Like once we took that first step and we both got help for 9/11, that's when we were like, holy cow, this is affecting our kids. And I could really relate to what you said, and I'll just be really fast and then I'll shut up. But when it really hit me and her was she went out shopping. I was playing board games with my kids, and we played board games for 2 hours. And my 10-year-old son goes, "Dad, your back's been to a window." And what got me was that for 10 years of his life, he has always seen me so hyper vigilant. I would never have my back to a window. I didn't pick up on it. He did. And that's when I realized, all the effects that my dad's post-traumatic stress had done to me and my sister. And then I had inadvertently, done that to my kids. Like my kids, they know every car that drives by, right? Like, and we live in like suburbia, safe, Sopranos, New Jersey, so I could really, really relate. And I really like the way that you said that your journey is your own. Like there's so many different things in the arena, like the Giggling block and the TRP, like pick, whatever you're comfortable with is what you need to do. But what you need to do is take that first step, right? You get what you put into it. And the first step is to go do it and try it and prove it wrong, right? If it doesn't work, keep on searching, because it's up to you to actually take charge of that. And then being a parent, that really struck my wife and I both. Like we want to break that chain, right? And we're doing everything we can to break that chain. And we literally have nightly conversations of, okay, how did the day go? How are we making the kids, how are we making sure they're not living the same life that we did when we were younger, and what can we do better tomorrow to make sure that, we're on the same front and we're on the same team. And I'll admit 90% of the time it's me that screws it up and I misinterpret what she's trying to do. But then, when we cycle back, but the story really hit home. I think you guys are great. And you couldn't, I'll help spread your word as much as I can and spread the book, because I think what you're doing is great. And that's all I had. Yeah.
Thank you. Communication. You're already doing it.
Right.
It's
life-changing. It's life-changing. It is.
For sure. Thank you.
Janet?
I found my mute there. One of the things that struck me was the walking on the eggshells. That happens. It used to happen a lot, not so much now. But the thing is I was a spouse first before I joined the RCMP. And I have to tell you, communications definitely. And the communications were, my husband would phone me at work and say, because I was working shift work, he'd say, it's lonely at home when nobody's here. And then one time I came home late because we had something come in and he said, "Did you put in for overtime?" And I went, "Voluntary overtime." You want to know how many times I heard that? And it's like, but it also was what you talk about, putting the shoe on the other foot. One time he phoned and asked me, "Do you know so-and-so?" And I says, "Well, no, I don't know him, but I know his wife." I said, "Why?" "Oh, he was killed tonight." "Okay, bye." And I'm like, what just happened? But after working for the Force 2, I learned you have to compartmentalize those things. You are a different person when you're at work, but sometimes you can't separate it when you come home. Our son was 6 years old and shoplifted twice. 6. And I said, "Okay, this can't happen. This is a police officer's son. We can't have this happen." And so I made arrangements for him to go to a child psychologist. And the child psychologist said, "You're a policeman when you're at work. You're a father when you're at home. Don't interrogate your son. These are all things that we're not taught. Like, we've been married 49 years and we've been through a lot of this stuff, including my journey through PTS. And I would, like you, my first psychologist, I wouldn't give you 2 cents worth. The second one was a dream. Like I went through it in times when people didn't even, it was 2003, they didn't even think that police dispatchers could get. But she said, you've got secondary from your job. And I says, I have what? But then I realized I didn't have fun anymore. I didn't laugh anymore. I was raising grandchildren. I was raising kids. I was working. I was volunteering. I kept myself so busy. I wasn't having fun anymore. And I really think that this power of our stories, and I spoke at the UN in 2017 about my journey. Like, we need to share these stories because we go to these events and stuff and we act like one person, but until we are aware, we cannot do anything about it. You have to become aware. And you mentioned about the brain scans. I just want to ask, was that Dr. Daniel Amen? Because I know he does brain scans and stuff, and I know he has a clinic in Seattle, or he did, but his work is amazing. And I think anyways, I'd follow him. But I think we all should have brain scans. We all have injury somewhere and they can heal, but it doesn't mean it all goes away.
Beautiful. Yes, it actually was. The Chicago office was where we both had our brain scanned. So they looked at primary and secondary, and it does give you peace of mind to look and say, oh, here's the injury. Here's a secondary injury. This isn't just something that's, maybe or maybe not. It's no, here's biological proof of it. And I do think that's pretty powerful. It helps dismiss that myth that it's a weakness or it's willpower. It's something like that. You can't willpower cancer away. You can't willpower a broken hip away. You have to treat it. It's the same thing.
Well, it's the mind body as well. I went for years and years with different diagnoses, pulled muscles, fibromyalgia. And there's a book called The Body Knows, I think. We go through all that. And what finally got my diagnosis was, I was in 4 car accidents in 10 years, and the last one took me out for a year. And I thought I was having problems because of mental problems and darkness, and that because of the car accidents. That's why I went and saw a psychologist. I didn't go through our RCMP doctors. I went on my own, searching on my own. And I think that we really have to pay attention to our bodies more, and to understand that when something's wrong, it is like, what else is going on in your life? And there needs to be more awareness in that in the medical field as well. But our stories is what's going to help the healing process move. Thank you.
Paul, and then Katie.
Tom and Jen, thanks for today. I spoke just earlier last week with a gentleman that that's also works with Stacy, and I want to thank you for the impact that she's had in his life. And I just want to, from a personal perspective, I want to thank everybody for being on here today. My wife and I both had extremely difficult childhoods, and I've been in the first responder world for a couple of decades. And I think for me, the turning point was a combination of things that Jen's referenced. It was looking at the physical side of it, whether it's nutrition, supplementation. The other part of it was coming to the realization that I developed this really good mindset of serving other people and saving other people. But it was really a hard place to come to realize that I needed to unpack things. And I think right now, my wife still works with the courts, so she sees a lot of darkness. We literally invest every week 2 hours a week with a really specialized psychologist. We call him a life guide. He's a close friend. And I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. And we tell our friends about that all the time, our first responder friends. And I would just say this, the power of that story is it's opened up people here in this region that would never go and unpack their stories. And we see them healing because we're willing to be vulnerable. So I want to thank both of you for being vulnerable. And I want to thank the others on this recording today for sharing parts of your story. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Katie?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody has said to Tom and Jen. I mean, you guys are just honoring the place and space that you guys have come to give us the capacity to even have these conversations that most likely couldn't be had 2 decades ago, and especially in this format where all of us can be sitting in different rooms and across the United States and Canada. Yeah, I mean, I struggle not to get tears, sometimes hearing some of the things that you and Tom have been through. On a personal note, I was married to a combat veteran for 12 years. Most likely TBI, definitely CPTS, but never diagnosed until after I co-parent my 2 daughters with him. And it struck me so much, Jen, when you said, pulling them to the water to make them drink, because I felt like I spent years and years. And while it finally culminated in a divorce, it also forced me to look at my own healing, because I certainly had the secondary PTS. And then eventually PTS, realizing all that I still had to heal from the marriage, and diving into, as you guys have talked about, all the different modalities. I'm on my 3rd therapist in probably 9 years. And I encourage the same, as you had said, Jen, where just keep seeking and keep searching. And then currently dating a combat veteran. We were best friends in college 16 years ago, had reconnected after divorce, but my goodness, you bring all your traumas that you've been through in all of those decades. I have 2 children. He has a child. He has CPTS, again, undiagnosed, but trying to gently encourage, and so that's why it was really powerful for you to, have that reminder. We're walking each other home. We're not there to pull, we're not there to push. We're there to serve as inspiration and lighthouses. And we certainly have, our own journeys. And I think one question I do have for you and Tom is, what have you found in terms of the modalities that you guys have utilized that has been the most effective, that you guys have leaned on the most?
It's a great question, and thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. For us, it was really interesting. So for Tom, really, it was about 2 years that we were dating, and he was in complete and utter denial, and we were going nowhere fast. We would have ended up, in fact, in my book, I talk about our wedding night was awful. It was one of the worst nights of my life. I woke up in the morning and said, we can turn this in on Monday if you get help, but if you don't, I can't stay in this type of relationship. It's going to kill us both. And he started with anger management then. He went and said, okay, I'm going to treat this first symptom. I have rage, I have anger, I can't control it, so I need to figure that out. It was funny because he was recommended in Savannah to this, he worked in substance abuse a lot, because Tom at that time was totally self-medicating with booze. And denying it and lying about it. And so in my mind, I'm like, he's an alcoholic. So he's like, I'll get help with alcohol and anger. And he saw this guy who was actually Eric Clapton's recovery specialist. And this guy sat down, he said, you don't have anger issues and you're not an alcoholic. He said, you're a problem drinker and you have anger issues, both stemming because of post-traumatic stress. And that was the first time we had heard that, even though he was involved in hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of missions overseas. And just to hear that gave us some sense of peace at first, like, this is what it is. Now we know how to attack this. And so for me, I, got on Google and started reading a bunch of things, and we probably started with something a little too woo-woo for Tom. Again, everyone's journey is totally different. I had, he had just retired from an extremely aggressive, elite kind of group of people who are highly judgmental and compared it every second of the day. So he still kind of had that muscle memory of judgment and a little bit of fear of it. So when I said, we're going to start with transcendental meditation, he was like, we're doing what? We're doing, huh? And yeah, here you go. Here's your coach, Michael Blitz, who was about this big and, worked with the Maharishi and stuff. And But I will tell you this, after the pulling and pushing and shoving, and he realized that he didn't want to live this way anymore, that he didn't want to have suicidal ideations 100 times a day, that he didn't want to have to hide out in the bedroom on Christmas and holidays because he couldn't control his emotional response, that he said, I have to take control. So he went to TM, Transcendental Meditation. Okay, I'll go. However, I think that was my first step in his journey versus his first step in his journey. So while he's come back to that 5 years later and actually has found a lot of peace in that, it might not have been his best first step. And so his first best step was nutritional supplements. And when he went to pharmaceutical grade, he lost 40 pounds, which was, you know, the weight on him was causing back issues, leg issues, all kinds of issues. So he was in constant pain. He still is, but it reduced his pain immensely. He was able to sleep for the first time in 20 years, more than 2 hours at a time. And so I think what the supplementation did was give him a break from that PTS response, to kind of quiet that a little bit, so that he had the space, he had the mental clarity to say, I don't like this, this, and this about my life. I do appreciate this and this about it. Because I think appreciation is one of the most powerful tools that we have as well, is to realize what we have. So for him, it really was the nutritional, getting his body right. And then from there, it was multiple modes of healing.
Thanks for that, Jen. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. Papa Ron and then Scott.
There he is.
There you go.
Thank you, Jen, for I guess providing some moments of clarity there for me. I want a couple of things. In the San Diego Veterans Coalition, we have a family life action group. Okay, so we hear much about, especially after the military, it's all the veteran, it's all the veteran, it's all the veteran. And we've spent the last 10 years and family, spouses transition too, families transition too, and making that really, it's part of the package. Your comment about spouse and children's suicide, do you have, I mean, maybe get it to Sarah, she can get it to me. If you had a reference that you pulled that from.
Sure, it's straight from the Pentagon.
Okay.
That number came out in 19.
In
So
29.
I think that was their very first study on secondary PTS that they've done. And I'll tell you, the number was 197 suicides directly related to a combat warrior. We don't know how they are quantifying those numbers. So
All right.
again, we think the number's a little higher, just like we've learned it's not really 22 a day. It's probably closer to 38 a day based on
Right.
real numbers. But
So-
I'm so glad you're doing that.
And then a contributing factor for many spouses is a continued compassion fatigue as well. You didn't speak to that. Was that in the journey at all?
Yes, it continues to be. I'll be totally honest. There's times I get real tired. I think it was this summer where Tom said, I could see the compassion fatigue. It's written all over your face.
Yeah.
And how he knows is I'm usually very jovial. I'm very happy. I wake up happy. It drives him nuts. But for a period of time, I was the same, where I just wasn't really enjoying things. I was like Janet, where surrounded by my kids that I love and adore and things. And I just kind of wasn't interested in any of it. And so we look out for each other. I know that's difficult on him, knowing that weight of secondary PTS came from his experiences. So I think a lot of spouses also tiptoe around that because we love our spouses and we
Right.
don't want them to hurt any more than they're already hurting. But putting that oxygen mask on as a spouse is so incredibly critical. I mean, I'm sure you know from statistics as well, when I started looking at the suicide, Tom had lost a bunch of friends to suicide. It was shocking to me coming from the civilian world. I didn't believe it at first, to be honest. When they said 22 a day, I said, there's no way there's 8,000 suicides a year. There's no way. So I started doing research where it's closer to 10 to 12. And then I looked at combat deaths and I'm like, wait a minute, if there's roughly 5,500 combat deaths in the same amount of time, there's been 35 to 40,000 suicides. Why aren't we having this discussion? And it is impacting the families. And so when we look at that number, there was a research, it's on our website as well, but 89% is the number that we saw that veteran suicide was directly related to a family incident. So that was shocking to me as well. So it wasn't necessarily this kind of Hollywood version of the veteran sitting thinking about war, or the veterans sitting and thinking about a lost friend. It was, I'm getting divorced again, I'm financially broke again, my children don't like me or don't want me, or they're afraid of me, or I had an incident with rage and I hit my wife, maybe not the first time, but the fourth, fifth time. I'm a burden. My family's better off without me. That's what we're hearing is the narrative primarily with the veteran suicide. So if we're not addressing and healing every member of the family, we're not helping the veteran either. So.
Okay, then thank you. This could be like a 5-day deal. You mentioned problem drinker, and I kind of laughed because in AA circles, the difference between a problem drinker and an alcoholic is problem drinker quits drinking, they start dealing with their problems. An alcoholic quits drinking and the problems begin. And so that is a kind of a true statement, because I was a problem drinker and I could really deal with that when alcohol wasn't part of the mix. Are you familiar with, or did you participate in the Warrior to Soulmate, the pairs programming?
I've not, no.
Yeah, it was a real interesting thing. The VA, we propped it up for the VA to get them to do that and get veterans in it. A real close family member of mine and her Marine spouse went through it. It was very healing for the marriage, just to learn how to start talking to each other. I mean, in any kind of a, what's a fair fight, kind of thing.
Yes.
That was one. And then last is for our family life action group. If you could, we're going into next year. I'm the co-champion with the board. And then we have folks from Hidden Heroes, hospice, hiring our heroes. We're getting ready to bucket up. We have a bucket for spouses in transition. We have a bucket for caregivers. For resources. We're going to tease up one for families, but you bring this thing up for the secondary trauma. I mean, if you could, in like 3 sentences, tell me what we need to, another thing that, because we're going to set up our goals, something we could focus on in your lane you're unique and all that stuff, but there's probably thousands just like you.
For sure.
So if you could, in a few sentences, tell me what would be something as an offering that we could make connections for.
I love that. I love that you're asking that question too. The spouse support is so necessary. It truly is a place of isolation for spouses. So I think anything that you can do that creates meaningful story sharing in a private, maybe safe environment. I know a lot of, if they're active duty members, feel really uncomfortable sharing with outside people or outside sources. We even at All Secure, we kind of keep people in the same family. So if we're doing something with the Marines, it's the Marines. It's the Green Berets, it's the Green Berets. And I think that has helped a lot in the family arena as well, because there's a commonality and an understanding. And when you get 5 or 6 spouses in a room together and they're all going, oh, you deal with that. Oh, you deal with that. Oh, I deal with that. It is so powerful. I have seen people transform in an hour. I've seen warriors' shoulders fall and the red go from their face when they understand that it's not something's wrong with them, that it's not something that's weakness about them, but a biological. If we can get our spouses to understand that as well, I think that takes a lot of pressure off. And the number one thing that we hear from spouses is, I didn't know anyone else was going through this. I thought I was in this all alone. And two, I really feel like I'm going crazy. Am I going crazy? Because I keep doing these things and either they're not working or he's getting better or she's getting better and then they slip back. Is it something I'm doing? So there's a lot of ownership in PTS and it's displaced. So helping the understanding, the awareness, switching on that light bulb is incredibly powerful.
And then we're really leading the county and city here in San Diego in the Hidden Heroes campaign, the Elizabeth Dole Hidden Heroes campaign for caregivers. And one of the things that we hear from spouses is their husband wants a spouse, not a caregiver. And that because for the spouse says, hey, I want to be a wife. I don't want to be your doctor. And so some of that stigma too. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Yeah. Okay. Is Scott, I don't see Scott on the call still. Paul had a question and then Dan. You guys, it's after the hour. So if anybody has to get off, we understand, but Jen said that she would stick around for some more questions. So again, Paul, did you want to ask a question?
I do, but I want to start by saying thank you to both Tom and Jen for what you've shared today. It has truly touched my heart. And I have a heart for the suicide problem and trying to figure out how best to help with that. But my question to you, Jen, is this. You pointed out where there is physical evidence of brain damage. I either did not hear or you did not share with us what the proposed course of treatment was to resolve those damaged portions of the brain. And if you know, I would love to hear it. And if you don't, I fully understand.
You're right, I didn't. Tom has just started his treatments last week, as a matter of fact. And so it's a series of supplements isn't the right word. It's a series of different types of medications that will help heal different minerals, vitamins, things that I don't know because the words on the bottle are this long. And we're truly in the place of trusting this neurosurgeon with Tom's brain here. But so he will go through that treatment. He just started, and then he will do various other treatments like the hyperbaric oxygen. He'll go through that for 50 or 60 days. That treatment's done at home. It's pretty expensive. They're about $9,000 for this device. So now we're in the place of trying to find, how do we tackle this one? And then how do we help tackle this for other veterans and active duty members? And I think the VA got a few.
I may have a solution for you. Where are you located? What city are you in?
We're in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay. I have a friend who did high altitude bicycle races.
Oh.
And he has a hyperbaric chamber that he's no longer using.
Oh.
And so, and I know this guy really well, so I'm going to ask him if he would be willing to pass it on to you, and then we'll figure out a way to get it to you.
Wow. That's
perhaps Sarah can interpose there. But I'm glad you even mentioned that, because this is a real possibility, and $9,000 probably is not. And that's just being realistic.
Exactly.
I went through what I now look back and realize was a form of PTS, but it didn't come from my military service. I was in diplomatic intelligence, and so wore a suit to work every day, and nobody knew who I was or what I was doing, which is the way it needed to be. But then when I left there after 10 years, I became a police officer up in the Los Angeles area. And I saw repeat here because I don't need to leave those images in people's brains. They were really, really serious and sad to see. And I, like someone else mentioned, I think it was Ron, became a problem drinker. And I recognized one day that I needed to do something about it, because after getting off watch, I would go to a bar. And so I purchased a Gulbranson organ and taught myself to play it. I have since had 13 different organs, including a full pipe organ in my home, which caused my wife considerable grief because of the amount of room that it took up. So I finally relented, and I now have a Hammond Elegante organ, which doesn't take up nearly as much room. And I sit down and play that not to entertain, but to relax. And I have probably 35,000 pieces of sheet music. So I'm fairly serious about it. And my parents insisted that we learn a musical instrument competently and a foreign language competently. And that was what got me into diplomatic intelligence, because I spent 7 years learning a foreign language, and I could read it and write it. I didn't know the medical terms or the legal terms, but all the rest I was pretty comfortable with. And so as a kid in high school, you know, you're trying to figure out how to oil your way or weasel your way out of doing things. I decided that I was going to take drums as the instrument of choice, because I figured the practice would be fairly short, and it was. And so when I taught myself the organ, it was because I really wanted to, and not because I was trying to get out of something. And I will share one little piece more with you and then stop. I grew up in Hawaii, went back when it was the territory of Hawaii. And my mother passed away in 2015. In the home that I grew up in, which my father had built for us back in 1951 or 52. And my great granddaughter and I sat down at the organ and played it together for my mother. In Hawaiian, the term for a grandmother is tutu. And so we played together, and when we were through, we walked into her bedroom where she was in bed, and she had tears in her eyes. And she says, "I never knew you could play the organ." And I said, "Well, you never ask." Anyway, I'll stop there. I'm sure there are other people that have questions, but thank you for sharing what you did. I appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing. And music is such a powerful modality of healing. We recommend it all the time. Tom plays guitar probably an hour every night. Same thing, just to decompress and relax.
Yeah, arts are huge, aren't they?
Yeah,
Oh,
they really are.
oh my gosh. Dan, you have a question?
Yeah. So, hi, Jen. Hopefully Tom's on here as well. I talk a lot, so I'm gonna have to keep this short. I'm gonna try to be funny. I'm gonna try to throw out an idea or a question, and I'm gonna say a few things and react to whatever you'd like. So I'm a fat, lazy lawyer businessman now. Used to be human intelligence. Now that we got Paul the state speaking up and disclosing state secrets, I guess I'll say I was human as well. So lots of things. You know, I think it was when I was guest instructing at the SEER school at the RTL, living off the backside of Bragg and Rayford, that it first dawned on me this moral injury and this moral dimension of doing things that is a little off and then trying to return home right away. My first job title was interrogator. So I've interrogated my kids and my wife repeatedly because it worked. And when they lied to me, I knew it, right? And I had to. Now, was that right? Absolutely not. But as a parent, I always got the right information and they were easy to break. And it's terrible. But so Tom, if I interrogated you at the RTL, please don't find me, please. I'm old and weak, please. But so got a lot of things to say, but I think, and this is not to suggest that you guys aren't doing enough, but I think it would be very valuable to take your message now. I mean, a very charismatic couple, complete badasses. I mean, there's no way around it. To take it to the beginning, so to reach out to the kids before they're soldiers, before they're service members, before they're foreign service people, right? And a way to do that, this is my idea, right, as a crazy civilian now, is, you know, if it's true that Activision has stolen Tom's likeness for Modern Warfare, that's going to be a perfect opportunity, right? Even if they've done it behind your back, or if you're in, you know, you did it legit with contracts and royalties, that's going to be a perfect opportunity to interject, like, hi, let's talk about suicide, right? Early on in that platform, and they'll do it and they'll eat it up because those companies are challenged with that stuff right now, those tech platforms. So not that I can help you do it, but I mean, and I'm not trying to sell services, that's for sure, but it's an idea. But the reason I'm thinking about that is because, you know, as a human guy, you know, Arabic, jumping out of airplanes at Bragg, you know, to a lot of people that sounds tough. I say that stuff, Tom, he's laughing at me, right? Like, come on, you haven't done anything, right? And I leave service and I don't think I've done anything, but right away, wherever I was at, I was dealing with not good things. So now when I talk to a head butcher, they're like, whoa, that's a lot. I'm like, well, I didn't think it was a lot, right? But they're like, geez, this is more than I've ever heard, you know? And then on the whole head butcher route and that whole profession, as a professional now, I mean, that's a profession that really needs to step up their game, because I have very recently talked to a, you know, we'll say a paramilitary, you know, guy, a SAT guy, and he's being told he's a sociopath. He knows right from wrong. He's just been expected to essentially be a serial killer for 20 some years. And now he's being told by a psych, he's a sociopath. No, he's not. He knows right from wrong. He's just been expected too much. And now we're not even there to help him, right? And then, like in my case, as I came back from, say, the initial deployment to Kosovo in '99, right? Nothing to brag about. I'm coming back and my head's on a swivel. I'm at a 4-way stop outside the new commissary at Bragg with my wife picking stuff up, and she's mad because she thinks I'm checking women out. I'm not checking women out. I'm trying not to get ambushed, right? She doesn't understand that. Not her fault, but I'm the bad guy. From day one, I'm the bad guy. So now I sit here. Candidly, I'm okay, right? No, I'm not okay, but that's fine. My wife's rejected me. My kids rejected me. My son, my firstborn, took his life at 13 in 2011, right? So now I hear 17 times, you know, and I just start break down crying, and that's okay. I don't care if anyone sees me crying. And I'm not saying this to flex. I'm saying this to give everyone a little bit of time to say, whoa, like this, and we all know this is important, but it's people like us that can talk to each other, right? It's not a therapist that I sit down because my wife saw him and he's like, yeah, I'm a Navy SEAL. My wife's like, you should see this guy. And I go, I don't think he's a SEAL. And I sit down and the first thing he says to me is, how many confirmed kills do you have? And I go, you think you're a SEAL? Oh yeah, no, you're not. You're a clown. You're a effing clown. There's not one special missions guy that would ever ask that question to somebody out of the gate. And he's like, oh yeah. I'm like, no, you're nobody, right? Plus you're not goofy enough to be a SEAL anyways. So I think that's it. I probably used up more than my allotted time, but the idea is like exploit Activision to get to kids early and say, look at this badass couple and listen to them, because people are listening to you and will.
Thank you. I really appreciate that advice, and thank you for sharing your story. I know it's not always easy, but you do it well as well. And it needs to be told and heard, both for yourself and for others. So really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Papa Ron, do you have another question?
Just nice to meet folks from the Show Me State. I'm on the west side of the New Madrid Fault in the Osho Joplin area. So because we're on the other side of the fault, I guess that's why we're Chiefs fans. Hope that doesn't rub you all the wrong way, but
It's all right. It's Cardinals here anyway. We don't have.
yeah, Cardinals and the Royals, but the Royals. So the Royals and the Chiefs are our team. So anyways, thanks, Jen. You really gave a lot of good thought for me to take back to the coalition and hopefully make the arena better.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So as we're about to wrap up here, does anybody have any last thoughts? Jen, that was amazing. It was, I can't wait to publish this also, because I know so many people will want to hear this in the privacy of their own homes.
Right.
And what do you want people to walk away with from this talk?
Oh my gosh. I hope that what people can walk away with is truly understanding that it's not your fault, that this trauma could come from many, many different places. It's not reserved just for law enforcement and military. PTS can happen to anyone at any time. But the most important thing is that you can get to the other side of this injury. Never, ever, ever give up. Never lose hope. I know sometimes it feels bigger than yourself, but remember, there are many people out there that care about you. You're never alone, and there are many resources for help. You can get to the other side of it. We're here. Others are here. No one's going through this battle on the home front by themselves.
Fantastic. Jen, thank you so much.